This is David Ehrlich of IndieWire. You are the reviews editor and the head film critic. There's quite a few people in my community who know who you are, knew who you were before I started watching your countdown videos, and then there's others who have gotten to know you because of the countdown videos. So I'd love to start off talking about that because you just released your top 25 best films of 2024. What does that process entail? Because I know it must be a lot, and it's very well done every year. I look forward to it every year. And I think, I think it speaks to how fun the editing is of those videos. And even if you don't agree with the top 25 you've chosen, which is fine, that there is still an appreciation for just seeing, looking back and seeing all these movies from the year and the various themes that they share and the moments that you find in them. Would love to know, how did you start doing those, and what does your process look like every year? What do you do them?
First of all, I just want to say, thanks for shouting them out, watching them in the first place, sharing them with people on Twitch. Hi, Twitch. I've never actually been or even, I don't think, watched Twitch before, even though I've been an obsessive video gamer for 35 years.
Oh my God, what do you play?
So this is like a whole new world to me.
Wait a sec.
What don't I play?
Okay, you're a gamer.
I unfortunately, I was going to say, I unfortunately have two children. Unfortunately, as far as my gaming extends, I have two children, although playing through Astrobot with my now 5-year-old son was a real full circle, a profound moment for me.
Oh, that's adorable.
But he also watched me play through all of The Last of Us Part 2 director's cut like 2 years ago when he was too young to be scared by anything. And he just delighted in watching me shotgun what he called the scary guys. So, but I'm of a certain generation. For me, video games, unless somebody's in the room with me, tend to be a one-player experience. And so I'm definitely drawn to the longer single-player games that I can really invest my time in.
Yeah.
I'm a sucker for all the blood, the Soulsborne shit. Yeah, I grew up loving JRPGs and action games, and now find myself just obsessively playing Marvel Snap and Balatro on my phone and trying to squeeze in some simulacrum of the gaming experience on the toilet or the subway. But in the time allotted to me.
You have now established yourself as you're a renegade gamer in this chat. They're all saying based, which if you don't know what that means, it's a good thing.
I'm not that old.
Yeah.
My tastes are so basic. I feel like I don't earn a base description, but
I think
I've been in the trenches for a long time.
Yeah, you are a gamer with a capital G.
But anyway, your videos, I should apologize to you and to your listeners that I've never really talked about these videos in any sort of public forum before. They're such an insular, private, hermit-like experience to make late at night, and I'm delighted egotistically for the chance to just sort of talk about them as if they are worthy of being talked about. Yeah,
I'm amazed. I can't believe that you've never talked about them.
I'm very sheepish about them, I think, because they are, I sort of struggle with how seriously to take them because on the one hand, I put a mortifying amount of time into editing them, and it is a real creative outlet for a frustrated artist, cliche like myself, who went into criticism, dropped out of film school because I couldn't really afford it. People were saying to pay for me to write about movies, and I was like, well, it feels like the universe is guiding me in one direction. Yeah, and so this is a big creative outlet for me. But at the end of the day, it's also just sort of a glorified supercut. And I'm sure I would roll my eyes if I heard someone else talking about their supercut in any sort of artistic terms. And so I sort of waffle back and forth, even as they've grown and try to couch my embarrassment in building fundraisers around them for causes that are really meaningful to me, which sort of helps me live with the the work involved in doing it. Yeah, I mean, it started because I was in film school and I needed to learn how to use editing software, and so I was just ingesting clips of movies that I'd seen recently and stitching them together, and finding that was for me the most enjoyable part of the filmmaking process. Was I was sort of itchy and impatient on set, and I hate I'm way too critical of my own writing to have ever actually finished a feature-length screenplay, because this is the part of the critic brain that is a real cross to bear, and that I'm just as hard, if not harder, on anything I generated myself than I am on things that I ingest from the outside. So yeah, I just started editing this footage together and thought that making a a countdown video with my favorite films of the year would be a good excuse. I'd never really seen anything like that back in 2011 when I started. I just, while all of my other filmmaking outlets fell apart, this ended up taking more and more of my time. And it became sort of over the years, I don't know, sort of like a personal a test. I guess like there were various challenges in every year in my life. There was one year I was finishing them in December and my dad died. There was another where other challenges were more positive, where like I had my first child and like I did this. But like through it all, whatever obstacles, so to speak, there were, I endeavored to finish these things. It helps at the end of every year for me to look back and be like, I was able to do it through this. I was able to do it through that. Could there be better uses of my time? Could I be writing a book?
Everyone could be writing a book.
Yeah, but it's like I unfortunately know myself. It's like, would I be writing a book? Probably not. So instead of watching 4 seasons of Love Island Australia, or spending another 100 hours in Metaphor Refantasio, which I got up to the last boss of and decided not to beat for whatever reason. I don't know. It's
I did that with I did that with Elden Ring, the DLC.
Yeah. But yeah, no. So I do these things. It's very in the moment. It's very cathartic for me. Late at night, after the kids are bed and I don't have the energy to do anything else, it scratches a part of my brain where things are sort of orderly and compulsive. It would be wrong to say the project is necessarily meditative in the abstract, because it becomes, with all these various things happening in my life, extremely stressful to finish on time, and tends to ruin every holiday season because
that's when it's coming
I'm just
out.
like constantly trying to find time to do it. One day I'll set a fundraising goal so high that it won't be met, and I'll be freed from the burden of having to do this. But I also really hope that never happens. So I'm sort of back and forth.
So how many years have you done the fundraiser? When I started tuning in, so I think it was like 2021 to your countdown vids, the fundraising goal every year has gone up because it's always surpassed. Like this year, you hit the goal before you even released the video, and it was your highest goal yet.
Yeah, I mean, I started the fundraiser, I think this is only occurring to me right now in the moment, but I started the fundraiser right around the time that my first of the 2 kids that I have was born. And I think that was really just me telling myself, like, I cannot justify this sort of frivolous waste of time if it is not benefiting some cause that's bigger than myself. I was initially partnering with, I would reach out to the filmmakers who were sort of number one on my list, and just talk to them a little bit about what causes were important to them, and they would invariably align with things that I also cared about. And so that was very easy. It was never like I went to someone and they were like, donate to the Republican Party. And I was like, no, thank you. And then the last 2 years, just on my own volition, I decided to sort of put that aside and just exclusively focus on raising money for various causes in Palestine. And so like they just kept raising the fundraising goal. And I guess I'll raise it again a little bit more next year. But yeah, I mean, I certainly wouldn't be making these things if not for that. And it makes me, I don't have a lot of pride for the things that I create, but I am very proud of the money that we've raised for these causes, and especially because like some of the causes have been smaller. And I mean, it means so much to me to give the money to like the Palestine Red Crescent Society, but also raising money for like local food banks in Brooklyn, and knowing that the amount of money we're able to give makes such a big difference.
You are an artist at your heart, because the amount of self-criticism that is only coming from someone who's an artist. Like,
but no, the videos you asked just like about the process at the very start, and obviously I haven't said a single thing about that because
that's how it goes.
I'm terrible at talking about this, but
the process there's none.
I tend to start I keep like a running musical playlist throughout the year. That's sort of the only note that I take, just so that I have a bank of music to draw from. And I start collating footage together in around August of every year, and try and think as soon as I can as like a song to use for the introduction and a scene that I can use to build the introduction around. And then we'll begin like really cutting in earnest in the beginning of October or so. But the first like 4 months of the process there's not a single image. It's exclusively just about building the spine of the music. And that is the part that is deeply unfun and agonizing. And that makes me be like, why the hell am I doing this to myself every year? And then eventually I have a spine for the music, and it's a lot more satisfying, like, putting everything in its right place by assigning images to the sort of musical bedrock that you have. But yeah, it takes about like five months and change of like, working between like, I don't know, I'm very ADD, so I'll do it. I'll be like writing a sentence for work, and then I'll like go over and do like one little cut here, and I'll go back. But it's a lot of late nights and that sort of thing.
Oh my God. Do you sleep at all?
I mean, I mean, it's yeah, no, I don't. But
Like, that's fine. You sleep when you're dead. Do you feel like you have, because you spend so much time editing and you've obviously, learned a lot about the editing process, do you feel like when you watch and review films now, you have an even more appreciation for editing? Like I studied acting and screenwriting, and so for me, those are the two things that I feel I most pay attention to, because that's what I have a background in.
I mean, I don't know, because like the kind of editing that these videos require is not narrative editing in the conventional sense. And so I felt like I learned enough about how difficult it is to stitch two shots together to have any sort of contiguous emotionality or logical sense of physical space when I was in film school. And doing that certainly gave me a better appreciation for how hard it is to, like, you watch like a scene of people sitting at a table in a movie, and if you've ever tried shooting one of those and cutting it together, it can look like the simplest thing in the world, and you just like, the geometry challenge part of my brain is just sort of weeping about how difficult it can be to put together. Making these videos gives me maybe a richer appreciation for like discrete movements within individual shots. I don't know. It's so different from the like, I don't think I would be any better, even after 13 years of doing this, at editing together a scene of dialogue. Maybe it would give me a different appreciation for music videos or something. But
bring MTV back. I want to get into film criticism now, because a big thing with film criticism is like, well, there's a lot to talk about. I have a lot of questions, but this whole idea that like film critics should have an understanding of how films are made, right? And you are somebody who did go to film school. You do have that understanding and that appreciation. One criticism today of film criticism is that modern film critics, or people who call themselves critics, like, they don't understand filmmaking. I think it was Viggo Mortensen who recently,
I remember that.
He was his quote about how few modern film critics understand film history. So I want to get your thoughts on film criticism, specifically like how it's changed, and if you agree with, they have been saying for a while that film criticism is dying, right? That it's a dying art, that film critics are a dying breed. Modern film criticism is just mush. And so here you are a film critic to give us your thoughts on.
I'm sure I've inspired many of those criticisms with my own work over the years, but I think it's a convenient that so many of those critiques started to be made when I began working professionally.
You're like, this is about me.
Like, no, I mean, I feel of two minds about it in terms of like, how valuable it is or is not for film critics to have like a hands-on appreciation for filmmaking, because I think that like a work of art is meant to sort of be ingested by people on a different level than that. I mean, I think that you can appreciate the craft involved if you know what goes into it, and certainly if you are dedicating yourself to something as a living. I don't know how I would do that without having as intricate and detailed a knowledge of the process that went into making these things as possible. I think some of the greatest film critics who've ever lived are people who were never on a film set, who couldn't give a shit nor care less about what lenses were used in a particular shot, and their energy can be more focused as a result of that on the effect of those choices. Editing is such an interesting way into this, because you're thinking about editing in terms of the award season. I always sort of roll my eyes at the best editing Oscar, because we in the audience have no idea what the editing was. Like, were the performances, the editing, was this how it was shot? What footage was left on the cutting room floor? I mean, like,
Mm-hmm.
how did the movie take shape in the edit? We're all just sort of reverse engineering it from our reaction to the film in totality. And so, editing is sort of an invisible art, and I think it just sort of speaks to the fact that like you can know everything about something and still really not know how it was made. But I think there is obviously value in having a fluent understanding with film history. I think it's especially something that people are mindful of and maybe elitist about in movies, because movies are such a young medium that you actually can, at this point in time, have a more or less comprehensive knowledge of everything that's been made. I
Yeah.
mean, I think, or at least the illusion that you can. Whereas, in the literature world, in the world of fine arts, I think it's sort of understood that there are going to be, the Western canon plays a big part, but there are always going to be these blind spots. I think that's true of film as well. I mean, I think even the most well-seen film critics from America, probably, there are huge swaths of Nigerian film and Indian film and whatnot that they have, Brazilian film that they haven't seen themselves. But the medium, as I said, is so young and has been so thoroughly canonized that you can have the impression that you've sort of seen everything. And so I think that draws in obsessives and completists towards film, and makes them feel like they have to be fluent in all these things. But it's certainly helpful, because I think for the same reason, film is always referring to itself in a way maybe even more viscerally than some other mediums do. But I don't know. I mean, this is the quality of modern film criticism. I don't really read enough film criticism to pass any sort of sweeping judgments.
I was going to ask you if there's any critics that you love, or
I mean, there are several that I respect, and that whenever I read, I'm so grateful that they have shared their insight and that they do this work. And obviously, the internet being what it is, it's so many more people who are, of all various levels of experience, who are throwing their voices into the mix. And like anything, some of them are going to be more valuable than others, and Letterboxd is its own phenomenon. Film criticism is dying in a business sense, and the fact that like we
Yeah.
all went all in on a web-based, ad-driven
Yeah.
model that doesn't really exist. I count myself extremely lucky every day that I have one of the very few salaried positions in this line of work. And I think even after all my years of experience doing this, if I lost my job tomorrow, I would not necessarily have anywhere to land on my feet.
You can be a
Yeah,
streamer. You can just
I could
just game on Twitch.
I don't know if I'm out for that. I don't know if anyone wants to look at my face staring at a television for hours a day.
You'd be surprised.
Oh no, I feel like people hate me online, and they always have. And I think because when you're online and you're visible to any degree, you're really just a character in somebody's head that they've invented for you. You're a shadow of a shadow of a shadow of yourself.
I was
And
going to say, I do know that you hated Wicked.
yeah, I mean, I hate movies, and then I know I have very strong feelings about some movies, and sometimes those feelings don't dovetail with the consensus, and that can easily
Can
cause
open up
someone
the
to
yeah.
yeah, and then they
Yeah.
just think of you always as that person, or you say one thing in the endless volumes of things you have to write on a deadline in a given week, and that one thing defines you to someone for years on end. And they create this version of you in their head and are punching at it. And it's very weird to be in what feels like such an antagonistic relationship with so many people I don't even know. It's part of the game. Like it also just tells me that like people care about the movies still. They care about
Yeah.
arguing about them. They care about
You're
how they
angry
make
at
them
me
feel.
because you
So
care.
yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
you don't have to care about me, but
Yeah.
like you care about the thing that I care about,
Which
and
is
that's
good. I
enough
mean,
to keep it
ultimately.
going.
Yeah. So basically,
Yeah,
what you're saying is like, yes, there's a lot of, nasty discourse online. And I know that a lot of film critics feel like, you better watch out who you're criticizing. What if you're a music critic and you're criticizing Taylor Swift,
sure.
get a good lawyer.
The fandom thing kind of baffles me. Like that's sort of white noise to me. Like, when you give a negative review to Dune 2 and someone in your mentions who's like Lisan Al-Gaib 27 is like, I hate you, whatever. It's like, well, you have a dog in this fight. And I think it's even more extreme when you're talking about like people responding to Taylor Swift or something like that. Like
Yeah.
the standing around these artists and the parasocial relationships and whatnot. Which
Yeah. Watch out for Club Chalamet.
yeah,
If you
well,
don't.
I'm intimately familiar with Club Chalamet.
Oh my God.
But wishing her the best in these trying times, but I think her house burned down recently.
It did.
Anyway,
She
maybe I
was
know too
still
much
talking about a
Chalamet.
complete unknown, though. I was like, damn.
Yeah, I
girl.
mean, hey, soldiering on for the cause.
Yes.
And one of the virtues of my job is that like I primarily am doing things for like seeing things at the very start of their lifespans at festivals and premieres and whatnot, when there hasn't been a conversation around it, and I can help sort of set the terms to whatever degree one review can. I do enjoy that, but I'm happy that the discourse is, or any discourse, I guess, is happening.
I think on the one hand, the democratization of film criticism is good, right? When something
Sure.
is no longer gatekept, opening that up to the masses is more equitable. You run the risk of something being watered down because simply more people are doing it. And there are, because of the internet, not qualifications needed to be a film critic. The idea that like everyone is a film critic these days, because if you have Letterboxd, if you have Rotten, if you have the internet, then you can
there are no qualifications to being an artist either, right?
That's
like you
true.
just I think that I don't know if there needs to be qualifications. I went to a good college before dropping out of a good film school, and neither one of those experiences I think meaningfully served the work that I do in any way. And I'm sure that I would probably be a better film critic or be able to better speak to certain films if I had spent those 4 years doing what Werner Herzog would suggest I do, and like walk across Europe and live with indigenous tribes somewhere or whatever. But I think
You're like, I'll
there's
get
a
right
real
on that.
yeah, okay, that's definitely something that I would do well, and they would love me. I was very on board with the idea and continue to be of like expanding the range of voices. I work in a field where a lot of people tend to look like me and have similar upbringings. But I think that yeah, I mean the equitability of it, and I think financially it really just starts there because when you have a field that pays so little and so late in the game, you are only availing it to people who can afford to live off of or work, have another job that supports them, and then still have the time to do this. You're making it impossible for people with children. I'm one of the only critics. Not this is not true. I'm not. There are not many critics who work full time who have kids, in my experience. But like that was after I got a job. But like there are people who don't have the luxury and the privilege of being able to be paid $100 or oftentimes these days a lot less per article they write. That is the biggest barrier to entry for so many people, and I think it's a problem that needs to be solved from the top down, because if anyone can be a film critic, which I believe is the case, it needs to be there needs to be a viable pathway there for anyone as well.
It's not Carrie Bradshaw rates for writing for Vogue.
Yeah, and like it can't be a
Sex and the
meritocracy
City.
if no, I mean, I watching old Sex and the City episodes. She's like, I made $4,000 for writing, like, and that's when I realized, like, yeah,
$4
like,
a
wow,
word.
what life.
Yeah, had people being like, "Oh, I can make money as a writer."
It can never be a meritocracy until it is viable for everyone. And so that, and film criticism would definitely benefit from having a greater array of voices, which is, I know, is a really easy thing to say as like a white Jewish 40-year-old man who looks like if you'd like a courtroom sketch of a film critic, I'm sure, like would just look like me. But certainly great strides have been made in that arena over the last 10 years, but also there are fewer and fewer jobs all the time. And so it's a real push and pull.
You reviewed both No Other Land and From Ground Zero. These are two films that came from Palestinian filmmakers. No Other Land is a joint filmmaking project between Israeli and Palestinian journalists and filmmakers. And then From Ground Zero are stories from Gaza that were filmed over the last 15 months as they have endured genocide. And then it was stitched together in an anthology. So we have one film that focuses on Gaza and then one film that focuses on the West Bank, the settler expansion in the West Bank that's been going on for a long time. So you reviewed both of those films, and I think the filmmakers of No Other Land were the ones who directed you towards the Palestine Red Crescent Society.
Red Crescent Society, yeah, because I raised money last year for the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, and to the best of my knowledge, all of the money that we raised got to where it needed to get. But over the last year, the process of actually getting aid into Palestine has been so fraught. And I wanted to make sure if I was going to raise money for a Palestinian cause again, which is something I desperately wanted to do, that it wouldn't just be an empty spectacle, that it would be the money would actually have some material impact on the people who needed it. And so I did, reached out to people in Palestine who are on the ground there and would be able to advise. And Basil Adra, who was sort of one of the co-directors and also the main subject of No Other Land, got back to me saying that he recommended the Palestine Red Crescent Society, who provides medical services in Gaza. And you can see their Twitter feed, what they're doing on a day-to-day basis. It's incredibly harrowing, hopefully less so now that there's been a ceasefire agreement than it was for the last 15 months. But, in terms of pulling bodies out of rubble and bringing people to whatever medical facilities they still have left. And just the fact that like they are operating at in such an urgent fashion still made it a really appropriate cause.
Really wonderful cause. It's one that my community supports. I was a part of Creators for Palestine last year, and we're trying to get something together again this year. But we're very familiar with those fun those nonprofits, because in this community,
just like a word about just about No Other Land.
Oh yeah, please.
Which I don't know if you guys have talked about on the stream before, but it's a documentary. I mean, everything Caroline said about it is absolutely right, but it is a really, really extraordinary film about a friendship between. It's not in any way sort of overly sentimental about this, like this a Jew and someone from Palestine becoming friends. I mean, it's just these two people who have very similar. They could have had very similar lives. I mean, they relate to each other in so many ways, but because they were born, a few miles apart on opposite sides of an apartheid system, live in radically different existences. And Basil Adra sort of inherited this responsibility from his father of documenting the incursion of the Israeli army into their settlement of Masfer Yatta, and watching it be razed to the ground and colonized by Israel. And he has been recording it through his own camcorder for since he was a child. And this movie is it's such a beautiful and devastating and harrowing sort of portrait that works that sort of international co-production into the fabric of what it's doing. And it's immensely powerful, and it is, to my shock and dismay, been treated as this like really controversial object ever since it won a main prize at the Berlinale in February.
Yeah, where the Minister of Culture, who was seen applauding and then was accused of anti-Semitism, then said, "Well, I wasn't applauding for Basil, who's Palestinian. It was just applause for." Like, it's so ridiculous. Like it's absolutely ridiculous. One, the claims of anti-Semitism, because what this film does is it uses filmmaking as a tool of nonviolent resistance, where it is simply putting the camera up and letting the images and the words that you hear speak for itself, right? You don't have to make any great declarations. And in fact, a lot of the moments of rumination of, Basil and Yuval coming together after something has happened, it's very quiet. It's very quiet, and you can see the difference between how these two guys grew up. But anyway, it's
bearing witness to the things that they capture in this film is enough, and that's a powerful argument to itself. It's like, you don't need polemic, you don't need to make geopolitical arguments. You can simply, observe what the violence that's being visited upon these people and understand its inherent amorality. But I mean, the movie is staggering work of art, and has been winning, I think, almost literally
almost every award.
Literally every award that it can win.
Yeah.
And yet, despite its acclaim, despite the fact that it is at this point guaranteed an Oscar nomination, if not a win, which would usually be a pretty appetizing thing for any film distributor, particularly because that is really the only reliable way to get eyes on a theatrical documentary these days. The movie is still undistributed in the United States, just because all the distributors, from the bigger ones to the smaller ones, are afraid to touch it. And it's going to be really interesting in a deeply frustrating and morbid way when it is nominated for and then likely wins the Best Documentary Oscar this year. And there's still a year after it first premiered, and there's still no opportunity for most people to see it. It's a real condemnation to me of the cowardice shown by the entertainment industry in this country. the only worst condemnation in this particular context would be if it didn't win. Yeah, it's a really awful situation. From Ground Zero is Palestine's official submission for the Best International
Yep.
Film Oscar and has been shortlisted. So we'll see what happens with that. I think it's less compelling as a film overall in terms like for its artistic merits, so to speak, but is also as an object. Its power is undeniable. It's 22 different shorts in an anthology format that were all created by filmmakers in Gaza. And for me, it really resonated as a portrait of sort of artists interrupted, because all these people who contributed shorts to the film, some of which are more effective than others, but every single one of them is sort of a miracle unto itself that it exists. They all, had various aspirations before October 7th, 2023 that were obliterated. And they are looking for outlets. They're looking for ways of understanding their own condition, making sense of their own survival, trying to process the loss of so much and so many of the people in their lives. And so even if it, like all anthology films, can be uneven and tiring in parts, that it exists, that it was put together as well as it has, that was put together at all, really is pretty incredible.
I said the same thing when I was talking to everyone this morning, because I went and saw it last night. I got a chance to see both No Other Land and From Ground Zero, and I know that I am one of the few who's had access to those films, unfortunately. They said the exact same thing, that it felt like a miracle. Each short felt like a mini miracle that comprised one giant miracle. The fact that they Palestinians have been able to do anything under the conditions that they have been surviving in, but also how, those shorts paint this picture of how the worst thing can be happening, but there's also like a monotony to it, like there's a monotony to being a refugee, where you are just shuffling around all the while with the threat of imminent death hanging over you. But you're shuffling around trying to find water, trying to get flour, waiting hours to take a shower. It's this weird juxtaposition of like monotony with extreme violence, though. And because it's inescapable, like the setting, the backdrop for all of these films is genocide. So even though they are different, and some of them incorporate like stop motion and puppetry, some are a phone call as like the center of the short film, it's all with the same setting. So usually anthology films, can feel kind of jarring. Sometimes you're like, oh, I wish I could have longer with this film. And other times you're like, this feels too long and it's only 3 minutes. But I think From Ground Zero really stood out because even though they are all short films, it is all happening in the same, literally in the same area with the same brutal conditions. So no matter what, that is there. And I wanted to ask you.
I think that's really, really well said. No,
Oh, thank you. I wanted to ask you, how, as a reviewer, how do you review something that is like From Ground Zero or No Other Land? So first of all, these are works of nonfiction. From Ground Zero has some fictional elements, but it is nonfiction. So how do you review something like that versus a work of fiction? I imagine you go into a film like From Ground Zero differently than you do an Emilia Perez or, a Wicked or
There's so much in common between those two films. They're basically the same movie, but tragic in their own ways. But it's a good question. And, first of all, I have another luxury, which is that like I don't write for the New York Times. I write for a slightly more permissive outlet where I don't know, I feel empowered to just sort of do it how I want to do it, because there isn't really a rubric for doing these things, right? Like you can only really write about how something makes you feel, how you process it. I mean, I think back to like, it's the furthest thing removed from like the old video game magazines I would read, where there's like 4.5 for graphics and 4 for story. And it's like, it's not really, you can't really break a film up in that way. And watching No Other Land, I mean, I think it's or reviewing, from Ground Zero, it's I think a disservice to my readers and completely futile to pretend that I don't have a real humanitarian and political investment in the message that these movies are trying to get out into the world.
Mm-hmm.
Much the same way as I mean, and there are oftentimes I'll watch fiction films where you sort of agree with the politics, but maybe not the aesthetics, or you agree with the means, or the message, but not with the means. And you have to sort of thread the needle between those two. It is a delicate dance to be critical of, let's say, like some of the shorts from Ground Zero. You're obviously not saying like this is bad. Like, hey,
yeah.
this was bad.
Like, hey, here's what you should do differently next time.
Yeah, like they should have done this shot differently, and it's like you should have, because listening to you talk, what I was thinking about was just I think you really hit on something really interesting, which is like the monotony that you feel from their experience is reflected in the viewing experience of the movie. And while that may be a little bit tiring as a viewer at times, there's also a really palpable and pointed element of shame to that, where you're thinking like, oh, like haven't I already seen a version of this story about the kid who's sad that his teacher was blown up in a drone strike, and like, they're playing the sad music, and you're like, what, like, that's the point, is that like this is the totality of that their existence has been reduced to. And yes, there are moments of humor in the film. There's such a diversity of people and the kind of life that and what interest them. But at the same time, the uniformity of the aesthetic of the rubble that they all live, of the tight parameters they can't escape, of the condition that, weighs upon all of them, and the threat that looms over, literally, in the case of these drone strikes every day, is of course going to be, it's going to feel like this one thing. And there is a really poignant tragedy in the aspect of like life can only be, despite all the infinite, polyphonic nature of the human experience, can only be so wide under such devastatingly limiting conditions. And I think that's even in what in other situations might be seen as like the defects of some of the shorts that comprise part of their collective strength. And so looking at that movie, it's like, yeah, you could nitpick it, like this just short was less memorable than this other short, but also it is instructive to think about the way they're packaged and how the sum is greater than the whole in this case.
Some people in chat were like, oh, what was your rating? I'm like, first of all, guys, I hate film ratings. I'm on Letterboxd, and a lot of times I hate giving stars. How do you, as a professional critic, review something where there is a sensitivity around it, where you're like, yeah, the point isn't for me to be like, here's how I think this film could be better. I'm not grading it on the same scale as I would a work of fiction, especially not one that is that has to do with such a great moral issue as Palestine is.
I think the least interesting criticism of any kind, film or otherwise, is to say something is good or bad. I think, often that is when I get the most bored of my own assignments and my own writing and the obligation they have to fulfill. It's so much more interesting to consider everything else about something, even if it's just honing in on one particular element of it and talking about its impact on you. And everything demands its own sort of rubric for being evaluated in terms of its value. And I mean, like, I don't know, I feel you hit the nail on the head in terms of just like a movie like that. You reckon with it on its own terms, which I think is, I often write at length about the context around movies, oftentimes to the chagrin of my readers. But like, I think that one of the most elemental and sort of instructive parts of criticism is figuring out what is relevant and what isn't to something, and helping determine what that is. The act of reviewing something like From Ground Zero is essentially just saying like, what is relevant to this story's existence, this project's existence, and what is it, and engaging with it on those terms. I did sort of sheepishly have to give it a letter grade on IndieWire, but as dovetailing with your exact experience with it, I ended up just sort of giving it a heart on Letterboxd, because I was just like, the last thing I would ever want to do, is give it a star rating that might potentially put someone off from engaging with this movie and from seeing it. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's one of those cases where the absurdity of putting any sort of like quantifiable value on art, it just really slapped me in the face.
Before I let you go, since you are a very busy person, I want to open up the floor to the community and take a couple of questions. So somebody in the chat wants to know if you have thoughts on the discourse around Emilia Perez and trans film critics who are getting attacked for criticizing this film.
Absurd that
they are getting attacked.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting phenomenon that I think you see in so many different communities where, particularly like in marginalized communities, when they see films that were ostensibly made for them or represent them, whether or not they were made by members of that community, they have their hackles up a lot more aggressively than they might if they were seeing another kind of movie, because as much as they may hunger for a certain kind of representation, they are also the arbiters, rightfully so, of like what that representation should look like. What has been said about some of the trans criticism around Emilia Perez is very offensive and absurd. Just because whatever my feelings of that movie, which I was just like, what the fuck is this? Like, I don't know. Audiard has
I
been, Jacques
completely
Audiard, who made
agree.
it,
Okay.
has been
First of all,
on his own way. He's been on the downslope
what
for
a
me for a long time. I really loved
mess.
his earlier
Yeah.
French stuff. Which, if you're going to show up for an interview, you have to be able to say that you love someone's earlier French stuff at least once over the course of,
Sure.
if
We
you're going to
got
be a self-respecting
check
film
that off.
critic.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think that the artistic defensiveness when you see the community that I'm sure in their hearts they most wanted to impress, right? Like the people they most wanted to love this movie, be bothered by it. And then you see that's compounded by a lot of Mexican audiences
Hmm.
having it out for the movie to the point where Jacques Audiard had to sort of apologize to the people of Mexico on the whole for how he represented the country and sort of using them as a vehicle to tell this story that he wanted to tell that, without necessarily considering its real world ramifications. I understand the defensive impulse, but I think you read the criticisms that they've been calling out, and they're so thoughtful,
They're
and you don't have to agree
so
with them, but
thoughtful
like
and
they're obviously
legitimate.
earnest and smart and passionate, and I think it's just not helpful for anyone to just sort of wave that away and
Yeah.
say like they're just jealous or like they don't like they are angry at people for doing this and that. It's like you got to take it in. And that's what the Oscar, as Don Draper would say, it's like that's what the Oscar nominations are for. You're going to get like 14 of them for this
Oh my
movie that
God.
I boggles my mind why anyone would particularly enjoy, and hopefully that'll be enough. But
Especially when there were multiple other films by
yes,
actual trans
right,
filmmakers
right, of
this
course,
year.
yeah.
I saw the TV Glow being one that I thought was far, far
Yeah, and stress
superior.
positions, among others. Yeah, I mean, Jane Schoenbrun's films are brilliant. I saw the TV Glow. I saw the TV Glow. One of my very favorite, very I can't even speak anymore. One of my very favorite movies of the year. And again, that just sort of that point that they made was just an extra disservice, sort of the cherry on top to like we're not listening to film critics who are giving valuable response to this film, but we're also going to throw other trans filmmakers under the bus as well, and sweep the work that they made and that may have resonated with audiences more
Mm-hmm.
under the rug. And
Mm-hmm.
so I didn't really find any of that constructive. And I think Emilia Perez to this point has been sort of one headache after another. But
I
I
think
have had that
AS.
song about the sex operation stuck in my
Oh,
head for
oh,
like 9 months.
oh,
So that's something, I
my
guess.
God. I know. I know. I have introduced that, unfortunately, to a lot of people in my community because
I see, I
I,
see, I see.
yeah, from an
It's
early,
well,
I was like pretty early on the what the fuck is this movie train.
yeah.
And anyway, I think the ASC is the only group that seems to not be awarding Emilia Perez. I think it was like the one
Yeah, but
major
they
film that
also,
didn't get. They also
in
ignored
the context
Nickel
of award
Boys
season,
though,
they
which
also
is
annoyed my beloved Nickel
insane.
Boys,
I That was
which
one of my
in that category
favorites.
especially. I mean, Nickel Boys, I think, is maybe the best American film of the decade so far. And Jomo Frey's cinematography in that film is so forward-thinking
It
and so
is,
ravishing and so emotionally piercing that for it not to have walked away with the award from the American Cinematographers Guild, let alone not get
let
nominated,
alone not get
is
nominated.
really an outrage.
Thank you very, very much for joining us today. This
Well,
was a
thank you so much
great
for having me.
conversation. Guys, don't forget that the fundraiser link is still live. So I know we've done a number of fundraiser things, but Palestine can always use more help. So if you have any funds and you're like, where do I put these? Well, David's fundraiser is right
I'll keep them
there.
warm for you. Yeah,
Yes, for the Red
and
Crescent
they'll go to a good
Society.
place.
Thank you so much. And we'll be
Yeah,
looking
thanks so
for
much for having me,
you.
Caroline.
We'll
Bye,
be looking for
chat.
you on Letterboxd. You're on
Yeah.
Twitter. You are, of course, with IndieWire, so lots of places to find you.
Lots of places. Cool. Yeah, I'll see you on the Twitches, see you in the video
Yeah,
games.
we'll see you
See you later,
later.
everybody. Thanks so much for having me.
Bye.